All right, everyone. Welcome back to a training with Aire Technologies. And today we're returning with Justin Burke from the factory, and he is catching us up on a deeper dive into louvers and a lot of the what and why behind it as well, which is what we as a team came into our own little set of Q&A internally. And we decided to bring Justin back and help the world catch up on our Q&A. So Justin, welcome back, sir. And the show is yours. So.
Thank you, Scott. Appreciate it. Looking forward to our deeper dive into louvers. So let's get going. What questions do you guys have?
Ron, the first question was, why would you put a motor on a louver? Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, so why would you want an adjustable louver, first of all, and then why do you want the different options of manual versus motorized to maneuver the blades?
Yeah, good question. So adjustable louvers act as a combination louver and damper. So it's serving the purpose of a louver in that it provides or allows for fresh air intake and exhaust. But if you want to close off or shut off that airflow, then you've got the damper portion of the louver that can do so. So those can be manually controlled with a hand quadrant, but if the louver is in a location where you can't easily access that for manual control, or if you want the shutoff to be tied to a fan system, then you are going to have to use a motor. You're going to have to use some sort of actuator to actuate those damper blades.
So the blades of the louver are in a adjustable or combination louver or whatever. Do they stay stationary and then the damper blades move only? So there's two sets of blades?
Correct. So on our combination louver dampers, there are two sets of blades. Not all adjustable louvers have two sets. None of ours have just one set, but some manufacturers do produce louvers that it's just one set of blades that are adjustable and they can be controlled by a motor.
Can you show us your spec sheet then? Because we looked at it last week and what we came up with was that the louver blades were actually moving, I believe. And
okay.
And what we're discussing right now would obviously have us fall under a combination louver then, right? As far as if people were discussing this scenario, we would go and look at our combination options, correct?
Exactly. Okay. Yeah, our combination option has adjustable blades on it. So it's both a combination and an adjustable louver. So if you hear someone talking about adjustable, you're going to have to automatically think, okay, go to the CED models, the combination drainable blade models. So I'm going to share my screen here. And
a typical louver is never adjustable, then correct?
Sorry, could you ask that one more time?
So a typical louver would never be adjustable, is that correct?
Yeah, correct. A typical stationary blade louver is not adjustable.
Ooh, I like that word typical. So let's pause on that real quick while you bring up the screen share. So do you know industry-wise, what is more popular? Is the stationary louvers more standardized versus combination? Because that helps us from a quoting standpoint, right? We should normally expect, for example, 75% of more of the quotes coming in would be stationary versus combination. Do you guys know that?
Yeah, I don't have an exact percentage breakdown or even rough percentage breakdown, but the majority are stationary. We get much more, way more requests for stationary blade louvers than adjustable blade louvers. And the vast majority of schedules that I'm looking at for plans, it's probably more like 85-15 stationary to adjustable.
I always wondered that. I figured that the stationary is more popular when I look at most specs, but okay.
Yeah. So what I pulled up here is a drawing of one of our combination models. This is specifically the 438 CED, and we have an actuator drawn on here as well. So here's a side view, the side profile on the left. So you see we have a 4-inch depth. The front of the louver is on the left side of the screen, and the right side of the louver would be the back of the louver. So you see this assembly with all the linkages and the rod running down. The portion of the drawing represents the motor, the actuator, and you can see the bracket here that connects to the rod that controls this second rod that controls the linkages that attach to the adjustable blades. So if I zoom in here, you'll see this top blade running down with the drainable front portion, because this is a drainable model. That's a stationary blade that's actually fastened in place to the side of the louver or to the jamb of the louver. And then underneath it, you have a thinner blade that actually, it slides into this portion of the extrusion. It just mates very easily. You slide it in place. And these blades actually hinge, if you will, rotate in that joint. It's kind of like a ball and socket joint there. And, you know, the same is true as you run down. So this would be a powered open spring close or fail close motor. So when the power's on, these blades, you could wire it any way you want, but typically when the power's on, you're going to have these blades in the open position like you see here. And then if you shut the power off, the blades will close shut. And here's a backside view. You can see the Belimo actuator here. Controls, rotates this shaft, which then will open and close the blades.
So with the actuator, I know in a lot of times on our controls, or air control side of things with actuators, is we try and not have it in the airstream if possible, right? To give you maximum airflow. Typical by design, is it usually in the airstream or out of the airstream on the louver?
I'm going to be right back. Excuse me 1 second. I'm sorry. My son is stuck across the lawn with his shorts down.
Quarantine training. I love it. So how would you, I mean, is that common, Justin? Would it be in this airstream like this mock-up looks like?
Yes. So this would be our standard design. As of right now, our only design that we fabricate too. And the reason being is that every spec that I've seen calls for the actuator to be internally mounted. So that's what this is, right? Because it's in the airstream, it's an internal mount. And the reason being is they don't want to have to mess with an actuator on the outside of the airstream, because that's going to get in the way of putting this product inside the wall, right? So if you're dealing with a 48 by 48 louver, for example, that's going to be going in a 48 by 48 opening in a wall. And you want to make sure your perimeter is unobstructed by any motor sticking out the side. So
that makes sense, because obviously I know in some louver applications, due to maximum size, we have to do a grid of louvers, right? Multiple louver installs. So if you had external motors on each of these, they'd be impacting the louver next to it. So
right, exactly. So then there's another reason. Absolutely.
I have a question for you. So say if, and this might be a dumb question, but if the power fails, how do these things fail? Do they fail open or closed?
Typical wiring would fail closed, but you can actually invert that and you can have it powered close and then fail open.
That's interesting, because I would think, because we represent a zoning company, and now granted their stuff is pneumatic, not electric, and they fail open to ensure there's no blockage of airflow. You know, God forbid if there's a power failure, hey, there's still air moving through the ductwork. Right. So, but obviously this is different since Louvers get involved in commercial installations, and we know from the fire damper side of Aire Technologies, right? So we have to consider all these variables from fire life safety side of things too.
So I was kind of curious about that. I know it is a different application.
It's just as easy to set it one way versus the other. So it's pretty much what is specified, what is desired. I guess I shouldn't say there's a typical way to do it. You know, standardly, these things are set up to be power open, fail close. And so if they want it power close, fail open, we can just switch it around. No big deal.
They can do that in the field. You don't have to do that, especially in the shop.
I believe they would have to unassemble the actuator to do that. It's not as easy as just flipping a switch.
I was going to say the wiring is decided inside the actuator install.
Okay.
You're literally, I want to say reversing polarity per se, but you're changing the switch wiring basically from my microelectronics days. I'm just trying to, I'm going back to the late 90s here. So
Yeah, there you go. I'm not super familiar with the actual mechanism of how you'd have to switch, but I believe you would have to, at the very least, take the actuator off the assembly. But if it's a contractor who knows what they're doing with actuators, that shouldn't be a tall task by any means.
I wonder if that's a common thing that is spec'd, if it should fail open or close. And I wonder if that's something that we should be asking, or if that's something that they should know, or if that's something we should have on our checklist when quoting these as well.
That's a great point. I think we should collect some more data points on that and see what the majority of specs are saying. And then if we find that, the vast majority of the time it's one particular way, then we can probably just do that standardly. But if we find that's more of a 50-50, we could even add that in of checking with the customer. Hey, do you want this way or that way?
I think our next question, if we're set with this, Scott, did you have anything left on the motorized louvers?
No, I think as far as do all louvers who come with motors, for example, the drainability feature of louvers is decided whether you have a motor or not, right? Like it's a louver design standard if it's going to be drainable or not, correct?
Correct. That has to do with this rain gutter type profile on the blade. And so you can have that with or without an actuated damper portion to the louver. Those are two separate features.
Now, again, from an industry standard, do most requests come through requesting, I would think, drainable, right? Because if you get a bad rainstorm, like where's that rain going? If it's hitting horizontally,
Right.
It's just going to hang out in the louver frame, or is it actually draining out somehow? So,
Yeah. A lot of times they're not calling out specifically a drainable profile, but the drainable profile helps with keeping water out, like you just said. So the test data behind the louvers that have the drainable profile is typically, not always, typically better than the models that don't have the drainable profile. So engineers are specifying based off of, I want this much CFM to be able to flow through the product without having to worry about water penetration. So each model, each louver has test data behind it and airflow data behind it to say whether or not that particular model can meet those specs. And that's directly correlated to how well does it keep the water out, and which that's directly correlated to the drainable or non-drainable profile.
interesting. Okay.
Another question I heard you bring up, you said when installing a motorized louver that this can be related to or kind of wired into a fan as well. So can this be wired into a different control panel if it's not easily accessible, or does it have to have its own type of control that's related to it?
Yeah, so these are the same actuators we're using on our fire and smoke dampers. So in the same way that a fire smoke damper can be wired into a control panel, these could as well if the electrician wanted to.
Okay. We're all set on the motorized part of it. I think our next question would be, how are louvers typically installed? I think Jen had a question on how are they installed into the bricks, what type of adhesives we're using, screws, etc.
Yeah. So there's not, I guess, a little bit. So non-hurricane rated products don't have stringent rules on how they ought to be installed. Screws are definitely commonly used, and then some sort of watertight caulking material around the perimeter is used once the louver's fastened in place. But with just kind of your generic AMCA rated louvers that have not been tested in hurricane environments, there's not like strict standards that say it has to be installed this particular way, like there are the strict standards with fire and smoke dampers, for example. That being said, typically, like you said, you're using screws, you're using fasteners, and the contractors are using anchor clips, which basically are just strips of L-shaped metal that will, butt up against the wall on one side and the louver on the other, and you put a screw on the wall side and a screw on the louver side, and now you've anchored it to the wall.
I was going to say, I mean, is that why a lot of people should be requesting, for example, a flange, so you have material ready to go to anchor to the fascia of a wall where it's being installed?
Well, the flange itself isn't there to provide an anchoring space. The anchoring is usually done in the back portion of the louver. So the flange is to provide a more aesthetically appealing look. You're going to be able to hide any of the caulking material on the perimeter of the louver, and you've got a nice picture frame all the way around. And with our bottom flange, our bottom flange acts, which this particular drawing doesn't have it on there, acts as an extra water repellent, in that the bottom flange has a lip on it that protrudes outwards. So any water runoff is going to be pushed away from the wall. So that way water is not just dripping down the wall underneath the louver.
Now, is that bottom flange standard on all of our louvers? I thought that was optional.
It's optional. It's not standard. That's correct. So standard would be this bottom that you see here. So there's no bottom flange. But if they want a bottom flange, we could definitely provide that. It would actually, it's not a slide-on flange like the sides are. It actually replaces this whole bottom portion here. So I'll actually pull up another.
Oh, so if they don't order this bottom flange, there's a decent amount of fabrication you have to figure out if you decided you wanted a bottom flange upon install, right?
Exactly. That is correct. That is correct.
So wait, just backing up. So you can get the louver with no flange at all, and then you do an add-on and you do the bottom flange only?
Right. So let me pull up a drawing here. It should help clarify this.
So it would never be, you don't necessarily need a flange. It's only for aesthetic purposes. It's never going to be spec to have a flange.
Yeah, it's more. It sounds like it's more of a finishing look. It gives you that nice, clean, border around.
Yeah, it definitely would be spec'd.
Okay.
So, for at least with
it
the
sounds
bottom,
like they should be using flanges all the time, though, from a design.
Well, not if you want to inset the louver into the wall, right? So if you see this picture on the left, what we're zoomed in on is the bottom of the louver, and it's resting on the wall. It's, it's inside an opening of a wall. So if you had a bottom flange here, you wouldn't be able to slide it or recess it back into the wall at all, which is what you see here. This has the bottom flange, so you wouldn't be able to push that further back. So if they want it flush with the outside wall, then yeah, I would say, there's really, in my opinion, there's not really a good reason to not get it with the flange. But if they need to recess it into the wall a little bit, then that's when you definitely would not want a bottom flange.
Okay, so then on that inquiry, do you see more flush mount louvers? Which honestly, when I look at commercial jobs, I always thought all louvers were flush, not inset into the wall, so to speak, or into the ductwork. So I'm intrigued. What's more popular? Flush or inset, like this option?
It's a good question, because what we see more is give me a flange or don't give me a flange. And that doesn't necessarily tell us if it's flush or not flush, because you could have a flush louver with no flange if they just didn't want a flange, right? So that's a great question. I don't know the answer to it.
What's more expensive? Flange or channel frame?
Pretty similar in price, because you're basically just swapping out this whole bottom. It's not adding on a whole lot of material. It's using a different extrusion for the bottom. I believe the with flange option is a little bit more expensive, but then if you add on the full perimeter flange as well, then that does add on a few bucks.
So full perimeter flanges are more expensive than no perimeter flange at all. It's just more material.
Exactly.
Could you say, go ahead, Jen.
You go ahead, Ron.
Just from like a sales point, could you sell the bottom flange as something that protects the integrity of the masonry by keeping water flow off of it?
Yeah, absolutely. Because a lot of times what is specified is an extended sill is what, they refer to it as, which is basically a piece of metal that starts off right here underneath the louver, and it lies flat up against the bottom of the wall, and then it has a little protrusion like this to push the water away. So that's not necessary if you have this bottom flange, because we have that lip on it. So exactly, that's a great point. You can say that, our standard bottom flange has this curve on it to push the water away from the wall, protecting degradation due to, years of water dripping down.
So I'm going to override your share just because I wanted to look at something here.
Yep, absolutely.
You want to continue? Yes. This is listed online as a architectural louver, but I just wanted to share this because it's like, well, okay, that's literally mounted into stone. It's on a rooftop. It's listed as a commercial louver. They're calling it an architectural louver, but I'm like, is this an example of a flush mount, or that looks a little bit inlaid by a few inches? So
it does look inlaid. I can't tell, but yeah. So in that case, you wouldn't be able to use our bottom flange or a bottom flange in general.
Right. Interesting. And obviously, this is definitely not one that's mobile at all. You could tell these are totally stationary. So
it's also probably 3 different louvers.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's no way that's a single louver. That thing is massive. So
it could potentially be, and they just put supporting mullions, vertical mullions that you see there, but it also very well could just be 3 separate louvers.
Yeah. Yeah, I just figured I'd share that quick, just to give us something to kind of like an application so we can look at it and see what they
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And even like the picture right beneath that one on the related images, that one there, that's inset, it looks like a bit. So.
Oh, that one. Yeah, that one definitely looks inlaid or inset or whatever the term is for that. But then like something like this is definitely more flush.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow. That's a big louver. Oh, we got City Man joining. So.
Yeah. I guess why would you want to push it back if you don't, like, what would be the benefit of pushing it back? Like the first picture Scott showed us, like, why would you want to push it that far back instead of bringing it more flush where you could use that bottom flange?
That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that one. I'm not sure if it's a architectural call on appearance, if they just like the look better, or if it actually serves a functional, engineering airflow purpose. I can't think of any airflow reasoning for that, but that's a good question. I'll look into it.
It actually
this one looks like it's got a flange. These installs.
Yeah,
so.
Like the first picture you showed, Scott, looks a lot worse for the integrity of that structure than something like this, just from the water purposes. Like, just knowing what I know about, like, working in the chimney industry, like water sitting on that will deteriorate that pretty quickly.
You would think that, yeah. Like I would hope, you can't see behind this round stonework, but you would hope they had a bottom flange at least. But
something.
It does look like the round concrete just goes right up to the bottom lip of these louvers. So, yeah, interesting. And there's definitely no birds. It doesn't look like there's any bird screens or insect screens on these too. So,
or they could have something on top of that kind of shields it.
Right, there could be something up top overlaying it. Actually, this round stonework is actually above it. You can see a little bit coming in this image here. So there is a little bit of a 3D lip, much higher, like 2 cinder blocks up, just barely showing up on the image. So interesting. So yeah, we're trying to understand the real world applications, Justin, because it helps us really connect like why these are even built, designed that way, and how it applies in the real world. So
absolutely.
Well, now that we're talking about it, especially for like Tara and maybe Cindy too, but I know for me, I notice louvers everywhere now. Like when I walk around, I'm like, oh my God, like look at that louver, look at that louver. So they're definitely everywhere when you're walking like in any type of like city or what, where there's larger buildings. So I mean, kind of on the same subject was one of our other questions then, if you were done answering that, but like we talked about the install and why you would want the flanges and stuff like that. Why would you want the sleeve then? Like how many times do they order it with a sleeve? I never really thought about sleeving the backside of the louver. They just attach it to part of the frame, or does it cover the whole frame, or?
Yeah, so not frequently. So I think we've had 2 orders that requested with a sleeve, maybe 3. And in those instances, I'm trying to remember the exact application, but I know one of them, what they were trying to do is they didn't give an explanation, but they didn't want to use our combination adjustable model, and they were planning on actually putting an air control damper in the sleeve with the louver, and they didn't want our air control damper either. So I think they had one that they already wanted to use. So that was one application. And so having the sleeve allowed for you to slide the air control damper in the sleeve. So, but how those are actually connected. So the louver sits at the front of the sleeve, okay? And the sleeve comes off the back of the louver. So you're never going to put a louver in the middle of a sleeve like you would with a fire damper.
Yeah.
The louver sits at the front, and the sleeve actually gets welded on to the perimeter flange of the louver. So if you're getting a sleeve, you have to get flange, because that's how the sleeve is attached to the product, is connecting the flange to the sleeve.
And then, sorry.
No, go for it.
Does that come already attached from the factory to the job, or do they do that there? Okay.
Yeah, we will weld it.
How deep?
Go ahead, Ron.
How deep is the sleeve?
So we have 4 different options, I believe, on that. Standard options. We could theoretically do any depth of sleeve, but I believe we standardly advertise. Not even going to guess. I'm just going to pull up the submittal because I'm going to be wrong if I guess.
Use your resources.
Here we go. 8-inch, 10-inch, 12-inch, 14, or 16-inch standard options.
Awesome. Is that
right on the website you're looking at, or are you looking at a spec sheet?
I was looking at our spec sheet, which is on the website, but I believe our product pages on the website would have that directly. So if you just go to Aire Technologies, go to products, louvers, it'll say louvers available now, and then the product page itself should have that called out. But Scott might make a liar out of me right now. Click on one of those.
We're living in real time right now. What should I look at?
Anyone, doesn't matter.
Okay, I'll go combination.
There you go, options, mounting sleeves.
There you go. We're using our resources.
Awesome.
Okay. The sleeve is made out of
aluminum.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Oh, so we do matched material, right? So everything's going to be one type of metal, right?
Correct. So we do offer different gauges of aluminum for the sleeves, and I believe it's 18 gauge, 20 gauge, or 22 gauge that we can offer. But yeah, it is aluminum on aluminum. That way there's no risk of corrosion between different metals touching each other.
And then, so while we're kind of on that same subject, then how do the anchor clips work?
So
I'd never heard of an anchor clip before.
Let me just make sure. So are you referring to, I believe on our Dade County rated, our hurricane rated model, we have anchor clips called out on that. Is that what you're referring to?
I don't know where we got it from, but we were like, what is this anchor clip thing?
Yeah, just give me 1 second. I'll pull up that submittal, make sure we're all on the same page here. DC 436. Yeah, there we go. Go ahead and share my screen one more time. So what I have here is the DC, the Dade County 436 model. And if you scroll down, standard construction. So I'm guessing what you guys saw was this.
Okay.
Close, 2 by 2 by all those dimensions. So when we were talking about installation methods earlier, I said if the product is not hurricane rated, there are no strict standard installation procedures that need to be followed. However, with any Dade County rated product, any hurricane rated product, there are set installation instructions that need to be followed in order to carry the Dade County rating. Just like with UL rated products, you have to install it the way that UL tested it, right? So Dade County tested it, or your third party lab tested it, that's how you have to install. So with these products, the Dade County rated products, we have set installation instructions to go along with the product that are approved by Dade County. And that is why this model calls out those anchor clips, but the others don't. So what are they? They are, let me see if I can find a drawing for you real quick, but they are basically just L-shaped pieces of metal that allow you to fasten the louver or anchor the louver to the wall. I'm going to pull up Dade County's website real quick. So just like UL has that product IQ search, Dade County has something similar. So I'm going to share this one.
I mean, it makes sense if you have a hurricane rated louver that you'd have a mounting protocol or standard that you need to follow.
Right.
So
exactly.
It's interesting that the rest of the louvers, though, it sounds like it's a free for all. Like guys could, silicone them, adhere them, screw them, whatever. So
yeah, I'm sure there are best practices. I'm sure there are ASHRAE recommendations, and I'll look into those and see if I can dig any up. But any contractor who's familiar with louvers is going to know how to install them. The installation's not very complicated. I guess we'll put it that way. All right, wall louvers, DC.
So you guys are listed right there on Miami-Dade.gov site for this stuff. Cool.
We are. So what we're seeing here is a notice of acceptance, an NOA, and every NOA has a unique ID to it, and that will be advertised on all of our spec sheets for hurricane rated products. But if you scroll through the NOA, you'll get to a set of drawings, and those drawings detail a lot of different things, but they should also detail some installation procedures. So if we zoom in, try to find a good example here.
Oh yeah, you can see the anchor bolt.
Yeah, there's the bolt going into the wall, and then you've got this L-shaped piece right here. That's your anchor clip. You've got the screws fastening into the louver as well, and then you've got some on the side, and then more on the side, and then.
So if they ordered this with anchor clips, have you guys already screwed them fast to the louver before shipping, or is that sitting in a box?
They would be sitting in a box.
Okay, so they would do that upon install.
Correct. So that's what the anchor clips are all about. I'm trying to see. So here, if you remember on the submittal, it said you'd get these type of clips if you got the product without a sleeve, and you'd get these types of clips if you got the product with a sleeve. This drawing here is representing a louver with a sleeve. So this line here and then going down is representing that sleeve. So you can see the louver is installed at the front. But because of that sleeve getting in the way, you can't get in there and put an anchor clip at this portion. So you've got this outside anchor clip that allows you to fasten the louver via the sleeve. And then on the bottom as well. Any questions?
I don't have any questions on that. Does anybody else? I have other questions.
Cool. Just quick thing I want to point out, you see no flange here. The louver is recessed a little bit into the wall, but this guy here does have the bottom flange, so it's sitting out flush with the wall. Cool. I think we're good on that one.
Cool. Just real quick, the different types of blades that we have on the louvers, like, in my previous experience, we always had like storm resistant or drainable blades. I know that we have drainable, and I just wanted to, highlight why someone would go with like one style of blade over another. Is there a really big difference? Do we have issues
Right.
getting jobs, where they're not drainable, or?
So it really ties back to the performance data behind the louver. And there's a lot of different factors that go into how well does a louver perform. And one of those characteristics is what's the profile of the blade? What does the blade look like? Because that's going to directly affect two things: how well does air flow through the product, and how well does the louver keep water out. So if we hop back over to a submittal, 1 second. 638 SD and share my screen. So the SD, stationary drainable, is what that stands for. And you can see very clearly there's this rain gutter type feature on the front. So that would be an example of drainable. And then if I pull up our 445 model, which is
so that's catching the rainwater and then it just drains outward from left to right?
Correct. So it would channel out left to right into the jams or the side of the louver, and the jam or jams have a cavity or a channel that the water can flow down.
And then it flows to the bottom of the louver, and then what is there, a hole that all that water goes out of? It doesn't go into the wall, it doesn't go into the ductwork.
Right. So this drawing here is not a great example because the bottom blade's butting up pretty closely to the bottom, but there's the sloped sill. The sill is the bottom of the louver, and because it's sloped, it just runs off the bottom here. It's kind of hard to tell.
So if you have drainable, you're pretty much guaranteed to have a bottom flange, right? Or no?
Actually, no. Because the bottom, the sill is always going to be sloped, whether you have a bottom flange or not. But that's a great point of, why would you want all this water running out and not have a bottom flange? So you see here, this is a non-drainable style blade. This is our 445 SW model. And there's no drainable portion. There's no rain gutter feature. But it does.
So if rain's hitting this, it just runs right off the blade.
Yep,
right?
It'll run right off the blade, and then it will trickle down to the blade underneath it, and then so on and so forth, creating a cascade waterfall effect. And that's what a drainable blade avoids, is that waterfall effect. It still keeps a good bit of water out, but typically, not always, blades like that don't perform water penetration wise as well as drainable blades do. But it all kind of ties back to performance data, like I was saying. So this particular model has a first point of water penetration of 782 feet per minute. So that's an air velocity. That's the air velocity at which water begins to penetrate the louver, as AMCA refers to it. So every louver that's tested by AMCA to their 500L test standard can undergo that water penetration testing. And all of those design criteria that go into a louver, its profile, the blade type, etc., are going to have a direct effect on how high or how much air velocity can this louver take before water starts to go through it under rain conditions. So really, it's not so much a matter of is it drainable or non-drainable. It's more of what's your water penetration data look like? How well does it perform under these test conditions? If they don't care too much about that, typically what we're seeing, at least from a quoting standpoint, is just quote me the drainable blades. That's fine.
Do you ever have someone that says to you, so I'm looking at these charts and I really don't know how to read them.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm just imagining maybe a customer saying to me, okay, well, this chart's based on a 48 by 48. So I'm getting a 24 by 24. Oh, okay. where is that chart located? Is that in the spec sheets?
Correct. So the second page of all of our submittals should have this data. If the product's rated by AMCA, our 245, our 2-inch louver is a non-rated product. And sometimes people want a non-rated product because they don't really care what the performance data is. They just need something to vent air, and that's totally fine. But all of our rated products have this data on the back. And this chart here tells people, so like that kind of where you were just going with that thought, Jennifer, is, well, that's good. That's for a 48 by 48, but what if I need a 90 by 60? And then you can just go to this chart, and this chart will tell you two things for any given size. It'll tell you the free area in square feet, which is the bottom number in each square. So
And why is the free area important, just for us?
Yeah, so what the free area is important because that's going to affect how well air flows through the product.
Okay.
The more free area available, the more that air is going to be able to flow freely through the device, through the louver. Because you could have super great water penetration performance by essentially just closing off the louver, stacking a ton of blades very closely to each other, but then your free area is not going to be good and air is not going to flow through the product well at all. So it's a trade-off, right?
So for free area, you take the calculation of square feet and then apply some other number to it based on the amount of area that the blade and the screens take up?
Yeah, more or less. There's a set way to calculate what your free area is, but essentially it's, okay, we'll do a 48 by 48 louver. How far apart, what's the minimum distance in between your blades? Then that means the blades are going to be taking up this much space. We'll subtract that out because that's dead space now. So what are you left with? Yeah, so you subtract out the area that the blades are taking up, and more or less that's your free area.
So like a 12 by 12 gets 0.28. So it doesn't even, a 12 by 12 gets 0.286 of free area, and a 24 by 24 gets, does it kind of like, it always stays the same, or does it decrease with the size of the,
Well,
I'm asking, does it increase incrementally, I guess? So it's 0.28.
Right. I see what you're saying. So it should more or less theoretically increase incrementally. You're not going to get a drastic jump or decrease from one size to the other. I mean, obviously you're going to have more free area square footage wise the larger the product gets, but the percentage, I guess, is a good way to think about it. The percentage doesn't really change.
Okay. I know we're starting to get to the end of our slot, and I know that we covered most of the questions. I'm going to ask one more, and then I'll let anybody else ask if you guys have a question. But can you just take us through what the finish options are as of current? Like, because I know without a finish, that would be called mill finish, right? That's when there's nothing on the louver. But sometimes you're going to get customers that are going to want paint, or they'll call it baked enamel or Kynar paint, or they maybe want anodized, which is like a chemical.
Right.
So do we have options for those as of now?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. So like you said, mill finish, that's standard. So mill finish refers to how the aluminum comes straight from the extruder, right? So the aluminum starts off in these cylinders, essentially. They're compressed, super high pressures. They're pushed through these dies, and that's how you get those special shapes that you see that our blades have, that the jams have, so on. So when that aluminum settles after it's been extruded, they treat it to the point where it's known as it's mill finish. So that's how we get it from the extruder. And we just put the products together. That's how we standardly sell them. But like you said, oftentimes they don't want just that mill finish look. They need something that's more aesthetically pleasing to match the exterior of a building. So that's when you get into color options. So what we can provide is a powder coating service. We have access to a powder coater down the road from our factory in Wagoner, Oklahoma. And we basically can get any color option available, but only in powder coating. And powder coating is not baked enamel, and it's not anodizing, and it's not Kynar. Those are all separate processes. So we do not have access to baked enamel, which I've found is typically fine at this point in time. Like baked enamel seems to be on its way out. People are looking for either they're okay with the powder coating or they want a Kynar finish, which I'll talk more about in a second. But what we can provide so that you know, and it's kind of clear in all of your minds, is we can do mill finish, or we can provide pretty much any color in a powder coat finish.
Do we have a color chart like that we would say like, hey, okay, you want to finish? Well, here's a color chart. Pick a color off the color chart.
Yep. So I'm actually working with marketing right now. A couple interns this summer who are putting together a color chart for me. And it's just going to be 20 to 30 standard options, but we're going to have a statement on there that says, this is just a sampling. We have access to thousands of colors, but you know, here's a sampling, pick one of these, but if you don't like what you see here, we'll get you whatever you need.
Cool.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, so if you see Kynar called out, that is a special type of floral polymer. It's a PVDF, which is a fancy chemical term, and it requires its own separate process, and we don't have a vendor yet that can do that for us. Eventually, long term, we would like to do it in-house. But that's not something we do yet, but you will see that spec'd quite often.
Cool. All right. So as far as finishes, we've got powder coat. Does anybody else have any questions? We'll hand it over to Scott to end it up if nobody else does. Thank you, Justin.
I think that was everything on Ron's list, right?
I think we had why some louvers had minimum and maximum sizes. I think that's the last question I had.
Yeah, that's what I have left too.
Yeah, there were some size differences depending on the louvers, right? So was there a reason for that? No.
I'm trying to think of what those would be. So I would imagine the Dade County, right, the hurricane rated products, those are limited to what you tested to. And so if there was a variation between a hurricane rated product and a non-hurricane rated product, it's because of that, because we only could test to a certain size. For the non-hurricane rated products, it's more or less what are you limited to from a manufacturing standpoint. So I know the majority of our AMCA rated products, we can do single section max up to 84 inches by 120 inches. That's a pretty massive louver. We will see sometimes they need larger sizes than that, and that's when you get into multi-sections. So we have theoretically an infinite size in that we can do multi-sections. So sizing shouldn't be too much of a concern because we can do multi-sections, but it's usually because of either testing limitations or manufacturing capabilities. That would answer the question of why they're different max sizes.
When you do a multi-section louver with a flange frame, do you just flange the edges of the ones that are on the outside then?
Correct. Yes, correct. So you would not flange the insides of where the louvers have to butt up against each other.
Okay. How do the flanges get joined?
They're actually welded on. So the jambs and the top and bottom have a little bit of an extrusion on the side that the flanges actually slide into. And then, so they slide in place, and then there's a couple welds along just to make sure it stays secure.
Home
Cool.
business life with kids.
It's such a pleasure. Pleasure is mine. I won't even tell you guys what happened during the meeting, so.
I'm good.
Maybe after we stop recording.
Yeah.
So does that actually sum up everything then? Do we have anything else on our Q&A list? I think
so.
we got it.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool. Awesome. Well, thank you guys for the questions.
Thanks for
Yeah,
coming
those
on
were
today.
great questions.
That was super helpful. I
Yeah.
like
Very, very helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I like that
I'll bring the
format a lot. That was a good idea. So I might actually do that with some of our other reps and say, hey, come prepared with questions because I know everything. So we're going to do a Q&A. You have to ask me questions. So no, that was very helpful. I appreciate that.
Yeah, we took probably about an hour last week and went over it all, and we all asked each other questions, and then like we were like, okay, here's the ones we can't answer. So yeah.
Smart.
Thank you.